Jason Walsh is today's guest on the show. We are very glad to have him. Welcome, Jason Walsh.
Thanks for having me.
This is time number 3, I do believe, and
that's a rare honor or dishonor. I'm not sure.
One of the two.
Yeah,
it's an honor.
One time we spoke of using images to expose the horrors of abortion. Another time, I believe we spoke about justification in relation to the Roman Catholic Church.
There you go.
And today we're going to be speaking about the truth about Planned Parenthood. So tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and then get into the ugly nastiness of what Planned Parenthood it is.
Well, I'm Executive Director for Arizona Right to Life, azrtl.org. And what we want to do, one of the things we want to do is help expose the reality of what Planned Parenthood does, where they make their money, what their goals are, and how they have a tremendous and very strategic marketing plan to control the narrative about what abortion is, and they do a fantastic job at that, so we want to counter that as best as we can.
All right, so that's a good succinct introduction. So what exactly is Planned Parenthood? Who are they? What do they do?
Well, Planned Parenthood is this nation's #1 abortion provider. Roughly about 915 abortions per day on average.
How many?
915, 916.
Specifically for within their facilities?
Exactly, just within Planned Parenthood facilities throughout the United States.
So that's maybe about 40% of the total, or what percent is that?
If we have the total around 3,300, then you're talking, good, let's say getting up to one-third.
About a third, okay. So, it's 33. I thought it was a little bit less than that, but no. Okay. Yeah.
Somewhere between there.
So 1/3, if you thought about it, I mean, if a business had 1/3 of the sales, if that would be a huge
market share. Oh yeah,
market share.
Oh yeah.
I mean, if car dealerships, their market share, Ford or Hyundai or Honda is much less than that.
Right. Well, we're talking about market shares and percentages. What exactly is the business of Planned Parenthood? We have some idea, but give us a fuller idea. Like, how would they describe themselves? How would you describe them?
Well, they describe themselves, obviously, as a healthcare provider.
So they provide healthcare to families, is how they would phrase it?
It could be in terms of, obviously, women, couples looking for contraceptive devices. That's where they're going to want to be able to say that they provide care in that respect. Obviously, they're not going to do every type of care, but the relationship of care in relationship to the idea of contraception and reproductive health. So again, they're trying to bring the discussion in that realm. And the reality is that they make 50% of their revenue in abortion, and they don't want to advertise that per se because they want to keep the stigma of abortion out of that equation. But the hardcore reality is that Planned Parenthood is a organization that is a tremendous moneymaker, and that's where they're going to get most of the revenue. They don't make their revenue with contraception. They make their revenue, obviously, not with adoption referrals. That's ridiculous. They make their money through abortion.
So maybe an advocate would say, well, yeah, that's the most expensive procedure they do. So what would you expect?
Well, it's interesting because the way that they market themselves is that there was a poll done by Students for Life of America in December of 2011, I believe, in which that demographic, let's say 16, I believe, to 26, 60% of that demographic had no idea that Planned Parenthood did abortions.
Also, they didn't even. What did they associate with Planned Parenthood?
Reproductive care, contraception, come and get some condoms, get STD check, things of that nature, and they didn't associate at all that the #1 abortion provider in America does abortions.
Now, is that because Planned Parenthood is that good with regard to their services, if you will, to this age group, or do we attribute that to that they just are not paying attention, or what conclusion do we draw from that statistic?
Well, I think that the basic model of this machine is that they don't want the immediate association to go towards that Planned Parenthood does abortions. They don't want to be known as America's #1 abortion provider. So what they want to do, one of their mottos is care no matter what.
So do they do the abortions at their at some or all of their various office locations?
Some.
Okay.
Yeah. And it differs in terms of chemical or surgical abortions, but not every Planned Parenthood clinic per se, and I don't like to use that word, but clinic will, not everyone will perform abortions. No.
And then they use independent abortionists that would come in on a kind of like a contract basis?
Oh, yeah, there's many abortionists who don't just go to one particular location. They'll do different locations based upon just standard operating procedure where you can't be open in one location, so you're going to be open in another location. I mean, some are open on Sundays, some are open, as many opportunities as they can to be able to reach the marketplace that they want to reach, and that is, for example, you go down to Tempe, that clinic on Apache is, it's no wonder that the majority of the women that are going to that clinic are obviously within that demographic that's close to that Tempe area, which is ASU, and you have all those Tempe Unified High School districts that are right there. So that's a huge component of what we want to do, is communicate to the students. Now, we can talk till we're blue in the face with people who are already pro-life, but we want to be able to communicate to the students and to the demographic what Planned Parenthood is up to. That's a real key component of what we want to do.
Yeah, and often are abortions usually scheduled on Fridays? Is that generally, that's from my limited experience about some of the sidewalk counseling and stuff, it seems like Friday is a key day. They sort of schedule them and line them up on the weekend. Do you know?
That I don't know.
That's what it seems like from what I know.
Why would that be?
I don't know. I think, okay, so this is rudimentary. I think the way it works is they sort of do the initial steps more through on other days of the week, and then sort of Thursday, Friday generally is where they sort of have the abortionists there to do all the abortions. That's the way I thought it was. And not saying only those days. Well, check me on that. That was my understanding of what I was told. Now, are they more franchised, like the way it works? So a person that owns a Planned Parenthood or is a director, like how are they actually paid? Is it like a chain? Do you know how the sort of corporate structure of it works?
Well, Planned Parenthood Federation of America is the arch, if you will, organizational structure that maintains certain protocols in relationship to directors who are in individual facilities, and those individual directors have quotas, and those quotas are directly related to the number one moneymaker, which is abortion. And so this has been shown categorically through people who have been former directors. Abby Johnson, particularly in Texas, who was a director, said that they had a quota about how many abortions they had to have per month, and that was being fed to them from the higher-ups in terms of Planned Parenthood Federation of America.
Now, they do that, but they also get a lot of federal funding, don't they?
They do get a lot of federal funding, and the reality is that a lot of that federal funding obviously is going to pay for things that are not particularly directly related to abortion, but it frees up all of this money organizationally, operationally, to do what they want to do, which is pay abortionists to obviously take care of the fetal remains. And this money frees up them to, again, they're making $300 million roughly every year total revenue, and the majority of that, obviously 51%, is abortion.
Because the line is that no tax dollars are supposed to go to abortion, but so much federal money goes to Planned Parenthood that it clearly frees up their ability, their assets to run what they do.
Helps them pay for the lights. It helps them pay for everything, yeah.
Now, is it true they do mammograms? Because I once heard a politician say that Planned Parenthood does other types of health care like mammograms, and my understanding was that's not the case.
Yes, categorically not the case.
So no mammograms in Planned Parenthood.
That's what the whole Susan G. Komen conflict was related to, and then the Planned Parenthood put the pressure on Susan G. Komen, and they flip-flopped. But Susan G. Komen had the right perspective that Planned Parenthood is not advocating in any way with the money that they're providing.
Right.
Remind our listeners about that flap real quick.
You got 40 seconds or so.
Yeah, Susan G. Komen wanted to pull the donations that they were giving to Planned Parenthood, and received a tremendous backlash on that in relationship to the public relations nightmare that became, because it became exposing the reality that this is really not for care, it's for the destruction of preborn innocent human lives.
Show yourself in all respects to be a model of good works, and in your teaching show integrity, dignity, and sound speech that cannot be condemned. With sound doctrine. With sound doctrine. With sound doctrine.
So you mentioned something that you had done recently with AZRTO in relation to Planned Parenthood, which whenever I'm talking about online, it's usually abbreviated capital PP, but it sounds odd to do it here. But Planned Parenthood You said you did a tour of Planned Parenthood. Explain a little bit about that, if you can.
Yeah, we work with Students for Life of America, and we brought in the Planned Parenthood Project to Phoenix College and ASU. And the Planned Parenthood Project really was a sort of outreach display where we brought 5 different vertical panels that basically illustrated what Planned Parenthood really does, where they get their revenue, all of the particular ways in which they try to sell and create customers. And then we had 915 crosses that we put into the grass. And it was a great conversation starter. People would obviously stop. They would wonder what's going on. And it was a great time for us to communicate what the real goal of Planned Parenthood is and listen to people's own analysis of what they thought Planned Parenthood was about and literally breaking down those barriers. And that's really what we want to do is go to the campuses, go to where the students are most at risk, where they're not receiving the information. Because, again, if you think about Planned Parenthood, and if you think of them as an organization that's primarily focused on the reality that they're making money off abortion, they're not going to really communicate the brutality of what abortion does to the preborn child. They're not going to show that because that would turn away people from actually doing this. And so it's very important for us to be on the front lines to communicate these types of realities. And if you look at it in a different angle, this is just a money-making machine in terms of the subsidies they get from the government and also the reality of what abortion costs and how they're the number one abortion provider. Hardly anyone on campus knew that, and so that's why we want to return again and again and again.
Take a few minutes to tell us about the ugly reality of abortion.
Well, what you're talking about with abortion, the word has lost all conceptual meaning. What we want to do is we want to break down this word from the high abstract into the very, very low reality of what it actually looks like so that people can make an honest decision. We're the ones who are confronted daily with this idea that, you know, we're anti-choice, but the reality is we're really advocating that people who have all the information in front of them will make an informed decision. And so what you're talking about is literally the dismembering of an innocent preborn human child. That's literally what a vacuum aspiration abortion will do. And I tell people that the vacuum is so strong that it can pick up a bowling ball. And when you encounter a 8-week, 9-week, 10-week fetus, that's going to rip apart the body. And when I use words like that, I mean to do it sincerely to communicate the reality of what abortion does to this preborn innocent human child.
Some other methods of abortion at different stages in the fetal development. You mentioned the suction, which is, I think, the most common. Mm-hmm. That's usually what happens because of when folks find out they're pregnant when they do it. What else is out there, though?
Well, when we communicate what a vacuum abortion does, we want to make sure that people know that most of the abortions are done in the first trimester. And so what we want to do is communicate how wonderfully and beautifully the first trimester baby actually looks so people are not fed this lie that it's a blob of tissue. You have cuteridge abortions, which when you have a later 17, 18, 19 weeks, where it's basically like a sharp-edged, basically tool. There's no other way to describe it, in which the baby parts are torn away.
Sort of like a curved knife.
A curved knife is exactly right. The curved edge is so that it doesn't perforate the uterine wall. And
which does happen, though. That is a risk. There's
does.
A great risk for women in abortion that their uterus can be torn, sometimes even the bowel, because of this.
Exactly. There's numerous examples where there's emergency hysterectomies done in order to stop the bleeding that's done in these abortion clinics. And I use that word sparingly, but that's what they want to be called.
And a lot of the mothers who die because of abortion, I guess, is a lot of times because of the hemorrhaging, the amount of blood loss that sometimes can happen if it's not caught soon enough.
Yes. And remember, if you have a product like Planned Parenthood does in relationship to abortion, they don't always want to communicate what happens in emergencies like this. So they're very slow to call 911. And the reason why is because then you have the health board come in. And we just had a law that we worked tirelessly on in relationship to pass, where these abortion clinics were brought up to the same level as the other medical clinics, where you could have people come in to inspect without having to give the due,
which, if you were truly about women's health care, you would want your facility to be state of the art to be able to accommodate, but that's not the case, is it?
No, this double standard. And that double standard, there's a big question mark. Who benefits from this double standard? None less than Planned Parenthood.
Yeah, it's certainly not the women, and it's certainly not their children.
No.
Well, when we come back, we'll get into some more with Jason Walsh, and I'd like to play a brief clip from a recent debate I had with an atheist where we talk about abortion briefly. I think it'll be enlightening for us to comment on it. Here with Jason Walsh discussing the truth about Planned Parenthood.
Show yourself in all respects respects to be a model of good works, and in your teaching show integrity, dignity, and sound speech that cannot be condemned. Sound doctrine. Sound doctrine. Sound doctrine.
We did the debate with Seth Andrews, the thinking atheist, and Seth speaks of his own journey that was 18 months that he describes as a journey from religion to reason, and he wrote a book about it.
Okay, that's clever.
And so I'd like to actually play a brief clip, because as we were discussing his reasons for not being a believer and my critique of his reasons, we actually had a small part about abortion. And so I'd like to play this, because what he's going to say here is, hey, God really likes to kill kids, you know, the flood and Abraham and Joshua. And so listen to this discussion, and we'll comment on it. This is from the part 2 of our discussion with Seth Andrews of the Thinking Atheist podcast.
Not be a God like that.
Condone the blood sacrifice of children, have never read the Old Testament. I mean, God has a taste for blood, often at the expense of even the unborn. So the idea that he would never make a request that required blood or sacrifice or pain or torture, all of those are completely wrong. And you can not take my word for it, but you can go to the whole of Scripture.
Seth, for you to be consistent, I assume you're pro-life then?
I'm sorry, I'm pro-life?
Yeah, for you to be consistent, you just said God has a taste for blood, especially for the unborn. You critique that as being immoral. So I'm asking you then to be consistent with your critique of God. Are you pro-life?
I'm a pro-choice guy, but I'm addressing the Abraham story.
But then why are you critiquing?
Talking to me about,
why are you
talking to me about human life, humanhood, when does personhood begin?
No. Why
and the rights of a woman to choose. That's a whole other show.
Oh, well, then why are you critiquing God? You're saying for having a bloodlust for the unborn, which I disagree with. But if that's your critique of him, it seems like you would logically, to be consistent, be pro-life.
So rather than defend your deity, you're going to come after me and say, because I support the right of a woman to choose, I have no reason to critique.
My point is you're logically inconsistent. You want to wield the tool, and then you want to put it down when it suits you. But to be consistent...
We simply disagree about the rights of women and when human life does or does not begin. Now, I don't like abortion. But I'll tell you, I don't believe at the moment that the sperm and the egg get together that magic happens. There's something else going on, and it's a very serious issue. But if you look at even, Joshua going around the city of Jericho and the walls come tumbling down, they taught us those stories at school children without going so far as to get into the part where the soldiers go in and plunge swords into the beating hearts of babies.
All right, so that's how this segment actually ended. So I'm no longer playing a clip. Now we're speaking again live and present with Jason Walsh of Arizona Right to Life. We've got a few minutes. Jason Walsh, I'd love to hear your commentary on that interchange.
Well, it's interesting because I heard him at the end say, well, I don't, what did he say? I don't like abortion?
Yeah.
Okay, well, the reality is why wouldn't someone like abortion? In other words, if you're talking about the removal of tissue, and Planned Parenthood literally, well, I would say in the FLASH curriculum that they want to get into the Tempe Unified High School District, it says that abortion is the removal of pregnancy tissue. Please.
Wow,
that's
what it says.
It says the removal of pregnancy tissue. Wow. So why wouldn't you be at least neutral about abortion? Just as, I'm pretty neutral about removal of, warts or whatever the case may be.
Yeah,
or
removing cancerous cells, that's a good thing.
That's right. Especially if you want to categorize it as a parasite, which many do on the left.
Yeah.
Why not be pro-abortion? I don't understand, because it seems to be that one wouldn't care one way or the other.
Right. Yeah, that was a great point. And obviously, he thought it was too, because he was speechless for a few seconds.
Yeah, sometimes on radio they say dead air is bad, but during those discussions it's actually very powerful.
But sure, and of course he went back, as abortionists do, to a woman's right to choose. But again, just to stick with the point of logic, here he is saying he doesn't like abortion, but of course he wants to defend the women's right to choose. So that must be a good thing. So he's in a place where he can't logically get out of it.
And also to critique a God, by the way, who's sovereign, owns it all, is righteous, in the manner he did, and then to turn it around and be, quote, pro-choice, demonstrates moral inconsistency as well. More on that with Jason Walsh of AZRTL. We'll tell you what you can do about Planned Parenthood. how do we expose Planned Parenthood? How do we help women who have been harmed, families who have been harmed by Planned Parenthood? What are the alternatives? I mean, a number of questions and issues. I just want to hand the mic over to you and really tell people now what to do, how to do it. Help us out.
Well, I think one of the things we have to really focus on is looking at what would Planned Parenthood not want us to do.
Okay.
That's the first thing that I want to look at as I'm trying to strategically plan different outreaches and activities and getting people motivated strategically is what would Planned Parenthood not want us to do? Well, number one, they don't want the general population to know that they're the America's number one abortion provider.
So they want to confuse sort of their actual mission in the public eye.
That's right. They want to say that we're for healthcare, we're for reproductive rights, but they don't want to go and delve into the reality of that they're the number one abortion provider. And then they most certainly do not want to get into looking at what the reality of abortion actually shows us, because that would drive away customers. Literally, that would change their operational direction, because you wouldn't have the amount of money coming in. We've already established that they're making over 50% of their revenue from abortion. And so if America knows they're the number one abortion provider and they know that what abortion looks like, that's really a key component for ending the way in which they promulgate this lie. And they have a marketing machine that is just really quite impressive.
Maybe even some of the corporations and charities that give to Planned Parenthood, which are numerous, maybe there's more truth, would be less likely to do so. I mean, United Way, March of Dimes, the list goes on and on of all these folks pouring money into this operation, which is really a shame.
Really, and again, there has to be a stigma attached to abortion,
right,
and you have to attach it in a way in which it makes it not advantageous to fund Planned Parenthood. And we really have gotten away from that idea. We wanted to go towards the idea we have to defund Planned Parenthood. Well, that hasn't worked as well as stigmatizing Planned Parenthood and making sure that people know that, again, it's number one abortion provider. When you think of Planned Parenthood, think abortion, because their whole name has been systematically constructed to sound noble. Planned Parenthood.
An educational institution is what they'd like to have people think they are.
That's right. And so the reality is that you're escaping every single time that they use that care, no matter what. You're escaping from the reality. You're getting further and further away from where they make their money, what their money looks like. When it comes in the door, are people who have been lied to, people who have been given misinformation, people who are scared, people who most certainly are not given all the information in relationship to adoption. They're not given information in relationship to the hope that is out there with crisis pregnancy resource centers. So you have people who are vulnerable, people who are believing the lie that the preborn child is not developed very well. It doesn't look like you and I. And so the reality is that you're fed lies. You're in a situation in which you're the person who they want to make the money off of. A typical first trimester abortion is just slightly under $500. And so in many ways, we have clinics that are not up to health standards.
Right.
And you put all those things together, it's imperative for us to then move that knowledge into the general population. And how to do that requires people who have the time, people who have the treasure, and people who have the talent to connect with us at Arizona Right to Life and come aboard and say, listen, how can we help expose Planned Parenthood to the general population of Arizona so that we stigmatize abortion and we stigmatize Planned Parenthood? Because it's not going to change any way other than that.
And that's why some of the live action videos with Lila Rose are helpful. I mean, do you want to say that's an example of how to expose this? What's going on there? Why are those helpful?
Those are helpful because it feeds into the reality of that we need to be an advocate for women's health. We're the real advocate for women's health, and the advocate is saying, listen, these places are not up to health standards. They're not open to the same standards in terms of inspection that other places are. And we need to recognize that in New York, in Virginia, and in Pennsylvania, we've had these horror stories come out, especially in Philadelphia with Kermit Gosnell. But many people don't know when the Virginia Health Board went into the different clinics, there are 9 clinics in Virginia, they hadn't visited in 2 decades.
Wow.
And when they visited they gave 80 citations to the 9 different clinics. And this wasn't an impromptu search. This was something that they told Planned Parenthood were coming, and they still had 80 citations. So this is the type of information people need to know. And we can't just talk about it among ourselves in the pro-life community because it doesn't get anywhere. We have to communicate and connect with one another, strategically move out into the general population. And to do that, we'd love to hear from you, azrtl.org.
So those videos I reference where they send some folks in undercover with secret cameras, and they get folks at Planned Parenthood saying things like, hey, if you're a prostitute and you're going to kind of always do this and you're with your pimp, we'll still do it. Even if you're clearly an underage prostitute, we'll still help you out. It'll be hush-hush. Or saying things
just
like...
in case of rape or incest of a minor, they don't report it.
They don't report it. What are some of the other ways they've been exposed? Well, where the folks will say things like, we specifically want to abort because we know it's going to be it's a black child, or donors that called and will say, hey, I want to give money, but I just want to make sure it's only for the abortion of a black youth. And then they got them saying, okay, what is your credit card number, that kind of thing. So those are helpful to expose the ugliness of it. And you brought some literature. Let's maybe talk a little bit about that, and then let's turn the corner from there to talk about healthy alternatives as well. So that's pretty ugly. What's going on there?
Yeah, Alliance Defending Freedom, they've done a tremendous job. They have a booklet and a website called Pretty Ugly, and basically what they're doing is they create a good argument for what Planned Parenthood is doing. Number one, they're trying to create customers by promoting risky sexual behavior to children. We see that all the time with the curriculum that they're pushing as they try to get in the Tempe Unified High School District. They're trying to communicate this licentiousness. They have a presupposition about premarital sex. They have so they're trying to create customers, and then they're trying to obviously push a strategy to have every abortion clinic have X amount of abortions. They have low standards in terms of the care of the facility. And then they want to make sure, obviously, that they are getting money from the government. So they have a business model, and that business model is directly related to the funds that come in through abortion. You can't deny that.
Right. So you mentioned women don't know the full truth sometimes. I mean, there's folks who do, but sometimes they don't. What do we do? There's sidewalk counseling. There's crisis pregnancy type centers. Tell people about those. What's the alternative where people can hear the truth, Jason?
Well, it seems immediate to my thinking that you go to where the at-risk audience is.
Okay.
The at-risk audience, let's say 16 to 25-year-olds, that is the greatest at-risk audience, and you go to where that at-risk audience congregates. Well, where does that at-risk audience congregate? They congregate on campuses. You go to the campuses where the at-risk audience is to communicate what's not being communicated. It seems very simple to me. And we just need to have a number of people who are involved with that same vision to go to the campuses to communicate what abortion looks like, what are the hope that's there in terms of adoption and the crisis pregnancy resource centers that are available, and communicate those to the people who need to hear it the most.
I'd like to hear you. I'm asking questions all the way, but a lot of people don't know about you that, I mean, you were extensively involved, and in some ways still are, with the pro-life movement, especially I think in the late 80s and a number of things. I mean, what's your take on what we've been talking about today, and other questions for Jay here?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was my privilege to do the little that I did. But what I really like about Jason and Arizona Right to Life is the strategic thinking about making looking at abortion in a different way, getting to the people who are vulnerable, who are hearing these things from Planned Parenthood, which just are not accurate. I think in this pamphlet, and you said, who put this together? The Alliance Defending Freedom?
Yeah.
In this pamphlet, they, if I can find it real quick, they talk about nobody likes misinformation, but that was not the word they used, Jason.
Fraud.
Nobody likes fraud. Well, it's a little bit stronger. And I think what's important is to realize that the abortion industry is not an industry that is trying to help. They're really just trying to make money, and they have such a commitment to abortion, even to the point where apparently, according to these facts, they're willing to do things that are illegal. There's such a commitment to abortion, even though they say things like, well, nobody likes abortion. We'd like to make it safe and rare. Is that language still used, by the way, Jason?
Oh, absolutely.
Is that still big?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think we just have to get back and say, well, it probably can't be made safe. It certainly should be made not just rare, but we'd like to extinguish it completely because it kills a human being.
Yeah, the reality is, again, that you have these euphemisms that have been carefully concocted, and you have the mechanism of Planned Parenthood who gets this message that's been carefully concocted out into the general population. And then you have this seep into a culture after 10, 20, 30 years. It's no wonder that people are buying this idea of reproductive rights and Planned Parenthood. Well, what the reality is biologically you're already a parent. You already have offspring in relationship to a fertilized egg. And we have to start moving people into a greater awareness that what we're talking about is scientifically and biologically, we have all of that on our side, philosophically, logic, and we have to start breaking down these euphemisms. And you can't break down these euphemisms unless you really understand what Planned Parenthood is after, what they want, and that they're serious about it. These are people who are full-time paid professionals whose job it is to convince people that abortion is an option that you can do in 10 to 15 minutes and sweep it under the rug. And so what we need to do is we need to match them professional to professional and say, listen, we have the opposite view. We have history, logic, science, and biology on our side, and we're going to show the exact opposite. That's what we need to do.
How do we help, Jason, women who have been in some way harmed, families that have been harmed by Planned Parenthood?
There are organizations here in Phoenix, like Rachel's Vineyard, that help people work through post-abortion grief and sorrow in relationship to both fathers and mothers in this relationship.
So post-abortion trauma, emotionally, yes, psychologically, is a common thing. Planned Parenthood, do they extensively deal with that? They help women who have been harmed by abortion afterwards. They clean up the mess, do they?
No, they deny that post-abortion syndrome actually exists. And so what's funny is that, well, it's not funny, but it's ironic that they're going to discount the words and testimony of women on this particular instance about how they have been psychologically scarred. It was the worst decision they ever made. And Planned Parenthood wants to flip the coin and say, well, we're not going to trust women in this case, but we'll trust women in the other instance in which it's okay for them to talk with their doctor, which is an abortionist who's paid by Planned Parenthood to abort this child. So the paradox is very clear that Planned Parenthood is not listening where they should be listening, and they're perpetrating this lie where it benefits them financially.
Right. That's a tragedy, and it's even more of a tragedy. You know, we've been talking about Planned Parenthood. A number of the mainline denominations that we've done shows on have all types of organizational ties with Planned Parenthood. ELCA, PCUSA, you go down the list, and in some way they're involved. They let them use their property. They sponsor seminars. It's really a tragedy.
Yeah, very sad. So I hope our listeners will get on the website. What's that again, Jason?
azrtl.org.
Yes, and this show's date was planned, and today is actually Mother's Day. So happy Mother's Day.